Everybody, welcome back. Max Prime, the story arcs. I have a very special guest, the legend, the legend to me, Jason Inman, comics guru, author, writer. Welcome, Jason. What's going on?
Thanks for having me. I don't know if I would call myself legend, maybe B-list legend, but I appreciate that.
And being so heavy into comic books, Jason, one of my what I wanted to bring across to the viewers or fans who tunes in to this channel. Tell us your background. Tell us who you are, and just fill us in. What's your origin story?
That's a very complicated answer. The short version of that is that I'm a Kansas farm boy who turned veteran because I'm an Operation Iraqi Freedom veteran, and then became YouTuber, podcaster slash published author and comic book writer, and now TV writer.
That's it in a nutshell.
So very succinct. I gave you the elevator pitch version. I can also expand. That's fine.
So that being said, so what got you into first comic books? Like, how did that come about? I know it's a little bit different for me. How did it work for you? Like, how did you get into it?
It was purely by chance. My first comic books were from grocery stores and gas stations, because where I grew up in Southeast Kansas, there were not comic book stores. So we got our comic books from, seriously, gas stations and Walmarts and grocery stores. And I picked up an issue of Batman after seeing Batman Returns. And I remember thinking like, oh, there's something here. But it really wasn't until I was in a gas station in the small metropolis, and calling it metropolis is being quite generous, of Erie, Kansas, and I saw the graphic novel for The Death of Superman. And I remembered that it had been talked about on the news. I had seen newspaper articles about it. And that was really the first time that I had realized that all of these characters existed in a shared universe, because Batman's in that book, and Booster Gold is in that book, and Wonder Woman's in that book. And before then, I kind of knew who Superman was. I knew who Batman was because of Batman, the Batman movies and Batman 66, but I didn't realize that they all shared a DC universe. And so it was really Death of Superman that was my gateway into modern, or at the time, modern and current superhero comic books, because I really wanted to learn, okay, who are these people? What is this story? Like, how does this person know this? There's more than one Robin. What does that mean? I thought so. Like, it was very much, if you want to call it, a gateway drug to comic books and like nerddom and geekdom.
So I was going to say mine was almost actually around the same time, like Death of Superman. It was when like Green Lantern went insane, and
Parallax, yeah. Ron Morris.
And that kind of just dragged me in. As soon as I like picked that up, and I'm like, what? Green Lantern went crazy? That just hooked me. So how did you decide to actually want to write comic books? Like, beyond like other things, like, writing romance novels, just regular like books. Like, how did you decide, like, you know what, I think I could do this?
Well, they always say write what you know. And I had been, sort of in the YouTube space and the podcast space, sort of like looking at comic books and going to comic book conventions and talking to comic book writers. And eventually I got to the point where I said, I think I could do this. I think I can put this together. I mean, television writing was always the goal. Like, that was always the end goal. And in the weird path to that place, I just said, well, I'm kind of, I'm not writing television right now. Why don't I put together a comic book? Let me figure this out. And there's a lot of amazing resources online, especially with the wonderful invention of the internet. Like, you can literally Google what comic book scripts look like, what stories look like, all this, it's like getting a college education on writing comic books. So, I guess the simple answer is I decided to do it one day, and I did.
Now, would you say that there's like, is it almost similar from writing, like, let's say a TV show, like the story, plot, and versus a comic book? Is it kind of similar? Is that how, like, it was like more, easy just to adapt to? It's like, hey, I can write TV, I can write comics. It's like kind of like almost one of the same because it's like a base story.
Not really. I mean, a story is a story is a story.
Okay.
But writing a comic book is quite different from writing a television show to a prose. But I mean, I mean, of course, like the structure is there, like the inciting incident and all that, and the rising action, all that, the 3-act structure. But I think for me, writing comic books has helped me write television more so than the other way around, because writing a comic book is very much about, you only have so much space. You only have 22 pages or 20 pages or however many they're going to give you. And that's it. That's all you got to tell the story. So you have to be very economical with your storytelling. You have to think about, okay, and Scott McCloud talks about this in the importance of writing comic books a lot, of like how much can happen in between the panels. Because when you read comic books, you put that together. Like us, the readers, were like, okay, so Batman's jumping off the building. Now he's in the street. Obviously, he flew through the air, 50 stories down or whatever. In television, you would never write that. You would never be like, exterior rooftop, Batman jumps. Exterior sidewalk, Batman lands. Because every viewer would be like, well, wait a minute. You literally cut out the coolest part. You know, you have to see it in a television story. Like the important stuff you got to see. And with comic books, I feel it's like we only need to see like what is the most important still frame. Like I always say that like writing a comic book is, imagine fast forwarding a movie and pausing at only the most important beats. That's a comic book.
Nice.
You're not pausing on the on a lot of the television shows and movies all end with that look. I call it the soap opera look, before they cut away, where it's like the music swells. Comic books don't do that. You don't do that in comic books. You move on. You move to the next scene.
So when you created your own comic book, so how did you, was there any like inspiration from your characters? It just kind of just came out of nowhere? And then that's almost a 2-part question. Like when you do have this like comic book in your mind, do you seek out a certain artist for it because you have like a certain picture in your head of how it's supposed to look, and then you seek out that particular person? Or do you just grab any comic book artist and say, hey, create it, this is what it's going to look like?
Okay, well, one of my pieces of advice would be, I'm sorry, there's a very big question, and trying to figure out how to meld it all down into one singular answer. Inspiration for everything you write, I think, either comes from you. I've hardly ever written anything that suddenly just popped in my head. It's usually an idea that I've had, and it's usually an idea that like simmers and cooks and adds, or it's like, okay, this is the right time to do this, or I think you would ask every writer. I think every writer would tell you that there's a project that they are not ready to write yet. And I definitely have a couple of those. Like, I don't think I'm good enough to pull them off, so I'm just going to push them to the side. So like, you just go for whatever's the most exciting, and what's the most, like, whatever you think is really going to make you sit there and type and write. That's what you're going to write. Because it is hard to create any kind of art, drawing, writing, all that stuff. And if you're not excited by it, you're never going to finish it. That's the biggest problem in this world in terms of art or movies. We all know those people that are like, I got that movie idea. I got it. Or I got that comic book idea. And the big difference between the professionals and I don't even want to say amateurs, or even the well-wishers, is that the professionals are the ones that will finish it. Yeah. The professionals are the people that you can tell, like, every year you come around, they got the new thing. Here's the new book. Here's the new script. Here's the new pilot. Here's the new podcast or whatever. And then if you're specifically writing comic books, I would never advise somebody to just be like, hey, you draw my book. No. I would never have somebody like Frank Miller draw an Archie comic book.
Yeah.
You got to think about style. It's the same as like in a movie thinking about cinematographers. You're not going to hire the gangster cinematographer, the guy that writes cop dramas and gangsters, to light your rom-com. Now, I'm certain that person could do it.
Yeah.
But like, you wouldn't really quite see it. So like when you're going for comic books, you always think about like, and I always find every one of my artists on Twitter. I keep a list on Twitter of people that I'm excited by, or I'm like, ooh, you're really good. Like, I like your style, and I save them. That's why I advise like any comic book artists that are watching or listening to this, I would say, make sure you have a link to a website with your portfolio and your email, because you never know what random person is going to email you. Like my current book, Super Best Friend, George Cambadise was an artist that I admired for a long, long time. I'd followed him for years. And Super Best Friend was this idea that I kind of had for a couple of years. I kind of was like, all right, I want to do this eventually.
Yeah.
And George tweeted that he had an opening in his schedule. And I shot him an email immediately on Twitter and said, hey, I got this idea. You want to go? And he was like, yes, I love it. Let's rock and roll. But George was like the right style for that. It was the same with Ben Matsuya on our book Jupiter Jet. So like try to find somebody that also excites you, because that's another process of it. Like everything generally creative, with the exception of a few, like a novel, or a painting, is generally very collaborative. TV shows are very collaborative. Movies are very collaborative. So you want to work with people that excite you, because they will add to your vision. They will do a lot of the heavy lifting, and then it just makes your art stronger.
Because I know I agree with that, because there's a lot of comic books I've read in the past where like if the artwork wasn't really like, if it was a certain style, I just couldn't really, I don't know, it's hard to say. Even though I'm really reading the story, the dialogue and everything, but then the artwork, yes, has to kind of go hand in hand with, if you have a great story and if the artwork is just kind of, I don't know, it meshes well, and then some just doesn't, and then you're just like, I can't read that, and put it down and close the book. You said Jupiter Jet, you said Super Best Friend. So please, if people do not know about these books, please tell me tell me about Jupiter Jet, Super Best Friends, your books.
So the current comic book that I'm working on is Super Best Friend, and it is basically, what if Jimmy Olsen was a YouTube live streamer, basically. The stars Maddie Moore, who in my universe is, he's the Super Best Friend, and he runs a Twitch stream where he live streams all the adventures of his best friend, the world's greatest superhero, Captain Terrific. And one day he accidentally reveals live on air his best friend's secret identity, accidentally. And the story is about how does he put his friend's secret identity back in the box. And then also it really examines like the relationship between comic books and social media and basically superhero fandom. It's like, I call it like it's a Silver Age hijink adventure through the lens of Photoshop, is what I like to call it. And that's at pre-order. You can pre-order that at superbestfriendcomic.com. Talking about going for dreams and stuff like that. Like I reached out to a dream artist of mine, Dan Jerkins, who is a Superman artist who I was always a big fan of, and he did a variant cover for Super Best Friend. But I also have several other comic books that I've written in the past. Probably too many to mention on this podcast, including Jupiter Jet, the Jupiter Jet series. We have 2 volumes that I co-wrote with Ashley Victoria Robinson, and they're both Ringo nominated for Best Kids Comics of the years they came out.
Yes.
And that's basically a 16-year-old girl with a jetpack fighting aliens. And if that sounds interesting to you, it has a flavor of Rocketeer. It has the flavor of, I like to say, it's like Men in Black meets Kim Possible.
Nice.
And it's an all ages book that you can give to anybody on there. And I know, like, you've come to my website, jasoninman.com. I have a novel about a nonfiction novel called Super Soldiers. There's another comic book. There's some other things over there. And if you're into podcasts, I podcast at geekhistorylesson.com, which is our geek podcast.
That's what I was going to get into next. So, Geek History Lesson. Tell me about that channel. I was like watching a bunch of videos. Like every video is giving so much information about comic books, moments, movies. How, like, I've seen like you hit like, was it over 400 episodes?
Yeah, we're above 400 episodes. Yeah. We've been going since 2014.
Nice.
On that. Well, it's a podcast first. It's an audio podcast first.
Okay.
So it's interesting you came upon it on YouTube, because that's where we like put the episodes a couple months behind.
Yeah.
So if you want to be current, you got to come over to Apple and Stitcher and all that stuff. But Geek History Lesson is basically, I'm a big fan in teaching people things. And we started it with Ashley Victoria Robinson in 2014. It basically, the idea is that we teach you about a pop culture character or an idea or a book in a little bit less than an hour. We give you everything you need to know about it, so that basically by the time you end our podcast, if somebody were to ask you about, say, Moon Knight, which is our episode that's going to hit in the future, you could have an informed conversation about Moon Knight. And we have a lot of fun. We've had a lot of really cool. We've had Mark Waid on the podcast. We have Ton King on the podcast, and we have a lot of fun because and then also because we've been running the podcast for like 8 years. There's a lot of recurring gags. There's like recurring characters that show up in the show because Ashley and I both have improv backgrounds. So one of the guests that continues to appear is Doctor Strange. Like Doctor Strange will call into the show and try to hijack the episode every once in a while. Because there's all these like little, by covering so many histories about pop culture and comic books, and comics has this 80-year history, we've learned that there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of repeats. Like characters die a lot. There's a lot of reboots. And then Doctor Strange, for a lot of Marvel characters, will just randomly show up. We don't know why, but he pops up almost in every Marvel character lesson. So that's Apple and Stitcher and all that stuff. And we've had a lot of fun, and I don't think it's going to end anytime soon.
And I'll post the links to your podcast in the description below, of course.
Thanks.
That being said, I was going to ask for off my mini list of questions. I was going to ask you, will there be a future maybe video about Black Adam potentially because of the upcoming maybe Black Adam movie? What I get a lot, because since I'm this like DC guy and everybody always comes to me, they're like, oh, so I got a question about this Black Adam guy. Like, why is he like Shazam and everything? So I was curious, like, did you already have a video or a podcast about Black Adam? And if not, will you do one?
I can't tell you off the top of my head. I don't think we've done Black Adam so far.
Okay.
But we will probably do a podcast on something Black Adam. Wait, didn't they delay that movie?
They did delay that movie, actually.
So probably not anytime soon.
Heartbroken. I forgot about that. Yeah, they delayed it.
There will be a lot of Doctor Strange stuff around Doctor Strange 2. Okay. We're going to do a lot of Thor stuff around Thor and Spy. One of the things, because we allow people to request the topics like you just did, which is one of the things I love about the podcast. But people are always like, why haven't you done XYZ? and they always like demand, and we're always like, we're a free podcast. Relax. But also, we generally say, hey, if you've heard that there is an X movie coming out, it's probably not going to happen until that movie. We've been pretty clear on that, you know. But people are still like, I want that Black Adam now, and you're like, well, how about when the Black Adam movie comes out? Go do some research on Google SEO, my friends.
So that's another thing I was going to bring up. With who is like, okay, if between like, you probably get this question a billion times, between Marvel and DC and other companies, who's like your favorite character of all time? Just who?
Just strictly Marvel and DC?
Yeah.
Okay. For me, the answer is, and I will say that my favorite character is without a doubt Dick Grayson's Nightwing.
Yeah.
Like 100%. And I'll say this answer. I literally just tweeted this recently, and it like went weirdly viral.
I've seen that. Yeah.
It blew up. It made Nightwing trend on Twitter, which I was like, okay. I've always said that Nightwing is Batman's greatest success. And the reason why I've said that, and again, I worked for DC for about 4 years, and the last question they ask you in the interview process is, who's your favorite DC superhero? So I said the same answer, but this is absolutely true for both companies. Nightwing, Dick Grayson, is Batman's greatest success because Batman will never defeat crime. But he took a 10-year-old boy who was traumatized and basically made him become a fully realized human being who will one day, and has led the Justice League on multiple occasions. There's that great line in some comic book where people say that there's two superheroes in the DC universe that everybody listens to. It's Superman and it's Nightwing.
Yes.
Because they're the two that everybody trusts. But I just think, because when you look at comic books, since their inception of comic books and superheroes, Dick Grayson was introduced, I believe, in 1939 or 1940. He was meant to be the reader. They introduced him because they thought that people weren't connecting with Batman. So they were like, well, let's give a POV analog for the audience, who at the time were 8-year-old, 10-year-old little boys and girls. So they gave Batman an 8-year-old sidekick. And then we've got to watch him basically grow up. He's one of the few comic book characters that is actually allowed to grow up. Like Spider-Man, they allow to grow up and then they de-age him. And then they allow him to grow up and then they de-age him. Or they allow him to grow up and they're like, no, let's introduce Miles. Like they can't stand having a 30-year-old Spider-Man, even though everybody that's watched Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse would be like, hey, that's who we want. We want the 30-year-old Spider-Man, or 40-year-old Spider-Man. But Dick Grayson, and we're getting pretty close to the point now. I think it's going to be next year. Next year, I think, is the point where Dick Grayson will have been Nightwing the same amount of time that he's been Robin.
Wow.
There will be exactly, because I think he was Nightwing in 1983, and so next year will be so. But anyways, there's just something about this idea of this purity that he is us. He is in all forms the comic book reader in that universe, and not only is in that universe, but he's also like one of the best superheroes of all time.
Yeah.
Like, what an amazing ideal.
Well, wasn't it in like Infinite Crisis where like it was mentioned that Dick Grayson was like the purest one out of all like the heroes in the DC universe? I think it was even mentioned in that book where they're like, out of all the corrupt, everybody was supposedly corrupt besides Dick Grayson. He was like the staple, like the only one in the DC universe who's like not corrupted and everything. So that, yeah, I totally agree on that. Like he's very like the purest hero beyond even like Superman, So it's like, yeah.
Well, I think because as well, again, he was created for us.
Yeah.
Like Batman, they create Superman was created to tell a story, and like Dick Grayson was created to be our eyes, and then he became this amazing story.
Yeah.
That's why every time they make Dick Grayson basically not Dick Grayson, it doesn't work. Like every time they've done it, and you kind of see every time they've tried to change him, the general comic book audience gets feisty. They get really mad.
Yeah.
I think it's because we subconsciously realize that's us. What are you doing? We don't want to drive a taxi cab. What are you doing? Well, I'm not, and I say that as no offense to anybody that drives a taxi cab. If you love driving, I hope you love your job.
So, how would you introduce them? Because, see, I was always known to like, first of all, the big one, which was DC. Then I got into Marvel. So then I liked 2. Then as a kid growing up, I discovered, there's like, Image Comics 3. And for years, I had one friend who was like, you need to get into independent comics. Come on, what's wrong with you? Stop liking the big 3. There's more to comic books than just the big 3. You got to go outside the box and stuff. Pick up an independent comic book. Learn about other things. That being said, so as like, do you think like independent comic books it's like a healthy, the I would say the third option, the third side of the coin, and like, how would you like tell people like, look, you should pick up, independent comic books, support independent creators, and
okay. So what I would say is that independent comic books are better than the 2 you mentioned. I mean, full stop. In all scenarios, it is. There's better stories. There's better art there. And I will tell you that we live in this Web 3.0 community
Yeah.
where people support people through Patreon and Etsy and YouTube and all these amazing things where you can get around corporations and you can support creators directly. And I say this even as I am an independent comic book creator myself.
Yeah.
Um, there's no doubt, because people are pouring their heart and their souls into these books. And if you buy these books, your dollar will go further with those independent comic books than it will for any issue of Batman and any issue of Spider-Man. And I say that because it is so hard to make independent comic books. Yeah. It is like soul crushingly hard. So when people do it like myself, we're doing it because we love it. We love it. So the greatest thing about this is that I would say if you're out there and you haven't read an independent, you haven't read anything besides Spider-Man or Batman or Superman for years, the greatest thing about Google is that it's so easy to be like, what are the best independent comic books out there? And there are also great apps like Hoopla, where you can literally, as long as you have a library card, you can read. They have all these independent comic books on there, and they have excellent curated lists. Some of my books are on Hoopla, and even reading it that way, even though it's free to you, the creator still gets paid. Yeah. Because the library. So I don't want to sound too much like, a revolutionary, but to me, I would say, do you want to support corporate comics, or do you want to support creator-owned comic books? And again, hey, look, I'll tell you, I read Nightwing every month.
Yeah,
I read Nightwing every month. I read The World's Finest that just came out. Loved it. I buy Fantastic Four because I love the Fantastic Four. So I'm not saying don't ever read those comic books. What I'm saying is make sure that all your comic book reading is not just the corporate guys. Yes. Go help out some of I guarantee you there's a creator-owned comic book out there for everybody. And with the power of Google, it's the easiest time ever to think about in the 80s. The only way you read independent comic books in the 80s is you had to go to the right convention and find the right creator and buy it directly from them. And now you literally can just open up an app. Yeah. Let pose the question to you. For the last 30 years, what do you think has been more exciting? The big two or creator-owned comic books?
Independence.
See, to me, you didn't even have to think about it, right? Yeah. And again, and I know, I can see your background. You have Superman back there, and all. You love the big two too, just like I do. But there's no doubt the last 30 years of exciting storytelling and exciting comic books have been propelled by independent comic books.
Yeah. Well. Because I had that friend who, because I'm to date myself. I was born in the 80s, and I remember the very first comic book I opened up, and I think I was 5 or 6. I walked into it was a little store. Walked in there, and it was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, just randomly. And I'll tell you this quick sad story that I went in there, bought the first issue. I had that issue number 1, the black and white one. And the first thing I did with it, I tore the cover off of it and threw it into the corner.
Why did you tear the cover off?
I don't know. I don't know. I was just 7-year-old kid, tore the cover off it, whatever. And I remember that comic book was laying around for years, and I was just just tossing it around. I think I drew on it, just threw it, whatever. And then of course my friend told me the story years later. He's like, I had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles issue number 1, not the first, not the third, not the second, the first edition, and he brought it to school with him, and then he left it on his desk, and then someone took it, and that was it, gone. And I'm like, really? Somebody stole it? He's like, yeah, it was gone. I was like, you would have been joining me being $64,000 richer, but
That's right.
But that was my first comic book ever, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
And that, that's something I think many people don't realize, is that they don't even think that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because it's been owned by Paramount and Nickelodeon, is an independent comic book, but it was.
Yes.
There's a lot of stuff now when I don't think people realize we're independent. Lock and Key, know? But yeah, I don't know. I would say there's something out there for everyone. And I would even say that now in this 2022 world we live in, whatever your niche or your story enjoyment is, whatever you are, whatever you personally are, like whatever you love, I guarantee you is out there in a comic book now. Like 20 years ago, I don't think I could have said that. Now I think it's, even when you think about like webtoons and stuff like that, it's all there. Like there's an independent comic book out there for everybody.
And that being said, we talked about the projects and everything. What are you working on? What's your next goals since you've done so much? What's next for you? And in comic books, outside of comic books, tell us if you have anything that you're working on. Like what are you envisioning?
Well, the thing that keeps going is Geek History Lesson. That train never stops. So we got some really exciting episodes there. Because the last Super Best Friend Kickstarter was successful, I say this like it's a bad thing. I have to write the ending of Super Best Friend now. But that's that is a good problem to have, and I'm so happy.
Yeah.
So I have to work on that. Beyond that, I'm just nothing that I can really talk about or anything like that. But like some stuff. I'm working on a couple comic books. I'm working on a novel, and I'm working on a couple TV scripts right now. So hopefully next year, maybe you hear about one of them.
And to your already fans, is there like one thing that they just don't know about you, Jason? Just one thing, tiny thing, anything.
I don't. That's a tough question. I like carpentry.
There you go.
There you go. Many people are surprised, but I'm a pretty good carpenter, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I caught you off guard with that one. Yeah.
Was that a good enough answer? I can give you another one.
That was really good. So that being said, I wanted to say, like, for a long time, I watched Jason from, again, his time at DC Comics to creating his own comic books to the podcast, YouTube. You were like everywhere on every single channel. You were like the comic book guru, man. And like I wanted to thank you for joining me. I wanted to let everybody know, like, who you are, all the good things that you're doing and everything. And now please plug yourself, your sites, the Kickstarters. Just go.
The easiest place to find me is on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Jawin. That's JAWIIN. And you can buy any of my comic books at jasoninman.com, including you can buy issues of Super Best Friend there. I have a pre-order store open right now. So if you want a Dan Jurgens, Superman, the man who killed Superman, I got him to draw a cover for an independent comic book. So if that doesn't sound exciting enough, come on over jasoninman.com.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, dude.
Like I said,
you're way too kind. I'm just gonna have to say that you're way too kind. No, don't bow to me. No. I gave you a carpentry answer. That doesn't.
Please share this video. I'll put the links in the description below to follow Jason, everything that he's working on. I'm Max Prime. This was the Story Arcs, and this was Jason Inman, legend, author, writer, and that's it. We're out.